So right now, I'm going to introduce you to Richard Wallace of the Pure Coalition and founder of Equity and Transformation. I love that the acronym is EAT because, I'm telling you, you like give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, what happens? He eats for a lifetime. And then we also have Moni Ruiz Valesco. She's from Paso, West Suburban Action Project. And they're going to have a presentation to give to you, and then I'll moderate a conversation shortly thereafter. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Richard Wallace, founder of Equity and Transformation and Pure Cannabis Coalition member. I'd like to start this by let's take a moment of silence for the victims of the war on drugs. All right. I think it's important to ground us in that reality because there are still people that are in jail right now for cannabis, right? So this work was definitely on those individuals' backs, and we landed on equity, right? And I think this conversation and what I'm going to present about is how did we land on equity? Because it sure didn't look like that in the beginning of this process, right? And I'm really happy for new language being introduced, right? Equity became a language at the same time that this bill was coming out. People had heard about equity, but it became like a catchphrase within movement worlds, within politics, et cetera. You started seeing equity, and equity really means fairness, right? So we began to organize around what does it mean to get to fairness. Oh, we got a clicker too. I got it. Okay. I think I got it. Okay. So what was it like? I think that's going to be the framing, is what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, right? So what it was like. The medical cannabis industry in Illinois is governed by, before, when we first got the information, it was governed by the Compassionate Care Act. We saw the Compassionate Care Act and we're like, this is problematic, right? People needed $400,000 in liquid capital in order to enter. You had issues where folks we were doing background checks, and a lot of times background checks are not necessarily preventive measures. But if you're coming from a disadvantaged community and you hear that word background checks, you immediately think that's not for me, right? So we saw that as being somewhat problematic. We saw that we did some research and we realized that a lot of our people had actually been on the precipice of this economy for a long time and just were not being able to transition into the formal economy. The extremely restrictive nature of the Illinois medical cannabis program precludes many individuals, especially those with disadvantaged backgrounds, from entering the industry. The compassionate use of medical cannabis pilot program allowed for IDFPR, there's a lot of acronyms in this world, to issue up to 60 organizations, dispensing organizations. So you can read that, right? There are currently, at this time, there are 55 licenses for medical cannabis dispensaries in Illinois. At that time, there are currently no black medical marijuana dispensaries. And when we got to that, we were like, how? Our people been involved in this, right? Right, we've been in this field, like how? And when you look at the arrest records, you could see how we were actually participating, right? So do the research and you'll see that there was interest historically in our community to be engaged in this economy. So what were the barriers, right? So much of what we learned was that most of this was due to the war on drugs. People with marijuana convictions couldn't apply for a business license. And in order for an application to be eligible, they had to have proof of at least $400,000 in liquid capital. And who has $400,000, right? We live in the city of Chicago, one of the highest racial wealth gaps in the nation. We have areas like West Garfield Park, Austin, Inglewood, where you see some of the highest rates of unemployment for young African-American men aged 17 to 24. And this was a specific demographic that was at the greatest risk of arrest for cannabis, right? So how does that individual come up with $400,000 put into the market? It just wasn't gonna happen. So what happened? We organized. Anybody know what community organizing is? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, get to know. That's how we got here, right? We began to organize, right? I got a phone call from a friend of mine named Caitlin Johnson, and she said, we're already organizing like we organize informal workers. So these were individuals that are operating in street economies. And we saw it, I immediately wrote an op-ed about it. And then she was like, we're gonna do a ballot initiative. And I was like, okay, let's do it. So we did a ballot initiative, right? And then we conducted 2 different research reports, and we called them chronic papers. The chronic papers is what we call them, right? To really discuss like what are the disparities, right? Where are people interested? Where are we being? Where are the barriers, right? Then we organize community forums to get the word out. The community forums are called chronic conversations. A lot of the work that we saw is that the language wasn't necessarily reflective of the people that we wanted to bring in. And we realized that a lot of times you can push people out by not using language that they use, right? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't look like it's for me, I'm not gonna go. So we use the chronic papers in order to get people to read, because the Chronic was a great album by Dr. Dre. But outside of that, it was something that we understood, right? And then we started having community conversations on the ground level, because at first it was just about freedom to smoke. People were like, yo, I get to smoke, and it's like, no, you can participate in this market as well, right? So how do we get you to that point? And then last but not least, we did direct actions, press conferences, et cetera. Collectively, these efforts led to the passage of Senate Bill 7, which has been recognized nationally as one of the most equity-centric recreational cannabis policies in the nation. And let me say this, Cass City Kelly, respect you so much. You did such, I mean, if we didn't have such a progressive, and shout out to the governor who came through swinging too. It was just like, it was like a perfect storm. At the right time, the right organizations were standing up. And how you get a Hemp for Hoods to reality, right, is by all of us working together. So that's essentially what happened. And what it's like now is we have restoration of rights. It's estimated that nearly 800,000 Illinois residents will have their records expunged. You got to give it up for that. Cannabis possession is removed from the city's vehicle impound program, which is extremely important. If an Illinois resident is found in violation of the possession limits outlined by the state, the maximum penalty is $50 for the first offense and $100 for subsequent offenses within a 30-day period. These are all very important things, right? So what does it look like, right? Economic equity, there's a social equity applicant designation. That was something we fought for. 50% of the fees are waived for social equity applicants. There's a low-interest loan program for social equity applicants, and 33% of the tax revenue to the city of Chicago via the cannabis sales will go directly to the R3 program. I think the name has changed.
That's it.
Yeah, okay, to be reinvested in communities that were mostly affected by the war on drugs. So that's the short of it, right? And that's what the victory looks like. The types of licenses, right? We have cultivation centers, which can grow up and harvest. You can read all that. We have craft growers, we have transporters, we have processors, which is also known as infusion, and then we have dispensaries. As you all know, the dispensary piece, you will find out who the winners are in May, right? And then the craft grow and the infusion license is up and open right now. So zoning, each region will have up to 7 adult use dispensary businesses, and you can see the map. Dispensaries only allowed on commercially zoned land. Downtown is excluded right now, the central businesses. And then I'm gonna pass it off. Well, thank you. Oh yeah, I was gonna do that.
Hi, good morning. My name is Moni Ruiz Velasco. Thank you for having me today. And you know, one thing I want to start with is, well, actually, one thing I want to start with, let me introduce myself. Let's start there. I'm already like ready to go into what I'm going to say. I'm the director of PASO, the West Suburban Action Project. We're a community-based organization based in the western suburbs. We do community organizing is our core work that we do. I'm also an immigration lawyer, and I'm also the president of the board of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. So we do a lot of collective work. We do a lot of work in Springfield. And this is a really important bill that passed that is going to benefit all of our communities. And there are some very particular negative consequences, unfortunately, for immigrant communities. And so the main thing for us is that people need to be informed. They need to understand the consequences for them, for their families. And obviously, we need to continue organizing to make sure that this is also addressed at a national level, which is really where most of the solutions need to come from in this particular issue for our immigrant communities. But we are really working hard to make sure that folks know how this law can help, and also how the current, the passage of the law and the legalization and the expungements and all of that have a disparate and negative impact in a lot of circumstances for our immigrant communities. So we need people to understand that. We have a clicker, I forgot. Okay. So all of our presentations are in English and Spanish. Our main the main community that we work with is the Latinx community in the suburbs and in the city. So we have everything up there. But I guess just a couple of things is, we are ground a lot of our work in the anti-criminalization work, not just around cannabis and other things, but also in decriminalizing migration and other ways that our communities of color have been disproportionately impacted. And so this bill was something that was important to us as well for that, because many of our families are separated due to deportation because of the criminalization that has happened in our communities. Part of the challenge with this is that marijuana is still not legal at the federal level, right? Even recreational use or medical use. And so for our folks, and this impacts all immigrants, not just undocumented immigrants, but people who have green cards and anybody who is not a citizen of the United States who lives in this country, they can even face potential deportation just simply for admitting to using something that is legal at the state level. And so, for us, it's very, very critical that people understand all of these consequences. But like I said up here, everybody's impacted. Everybody who's not a citizen is impacted. So people who have DACA, people who have any kind of, a tourist visa or a student visa, or who are undocumented or any immigration status other than being a U.S. citizen have and can face potential consequences because of use of cannabis or benefiting from the cannabis industry as well. So what we want people to understand is that they should not admit to using, so that even though it is legal at the state level, and even though, it is going to be fine, and it is fine now, and they won't be necessarily criminalized for it, at the federal level it's not. So recently, the immigration agencies reissued their policy on cannabis, and as more states are taking these steps to decriminalize cannabis, immigration agents are being reminded to make sure to ask people about use. And that was just recently reissued and updated. So as people are traveling from outside the country, for example, and coming into the airport, Customs and Border Protection agents, when you present your passport, are now starting to be more active in asking people, have you ever used cannabis? Or is there any evidence, like in your phone? Because as you know, sometimes they can get into your phones and they can get into your things that you've ever used. If people say yes, that they've used, and a lot of people are going to say yes because it's legal and because they're not going to have heard us talk about this, then, they can face up to potential deportation, even just for admitting use. You don't have to have a conviction or an arrest or anything like that for it to impact someone's immigration status. So we definitely want people to be informed about that and making sure that they're not admitting use, that they're not carrying stuff with them, because if immigration stops someone and you have that, then that is another way that you can be subjected to detention and deportation. And admitting use will actually, if you are detained by immigration and you admit to using cannabis, you're held to the standard of what's called mandatory detention, which means you can't even get out of detention to fight your case with a bond. So you're not even eligible for an immigration bond. So it is pretty severe. And that includes both medical and recreational use of marijuana. So that's something that we're very concerned about. So as I mentioned, we're letting people know not to admit, that they have obviously right not to answer questions, and that they should consult with an attorney or somebody, a legal representative, to make sure that they understand their own personal, the impact that this can have on them and on their families. Before we get to questions, the one other thing we want to warn people about is that if people work in the cannabis industry, because again, it's still considered something unlawful at the federal level, that could also impact their immigration status or the immigration status of people in their household. So the majority of immigrants in the state and around the country live in what we call mixed status families, which means that some people may be citizens, some people may be undocumented, some people may have different immigration status. If anybody in the household works in the cannabis industry, it could potentially impact the immigration status of other people in the household. So if, your child is working as a cashier at a dispensary and contribute to the household of your income, and a parent or a sibling or somebody is undocumented, that person, that undocumented sibling, could be negatively impacted by anyone benefiting in any way. That includes investing in the cannabis industry, working in the cannabis industry, or anything that benefits them financially. So that is another really concern that we have. And then the last thing is just that for immigration purposes, the expungement and vacating of convictions has no effect. So people will still be considered to have been convicted of a crime and will still need to produce those records if immigration agents ask them to do so. And what we're recommending to people right now is that if you have ever been arrested or convicted for any cannabis-related offense, that they go and obtain 3 or 4 certified copies of their criminal records, because immigration may ask for them at some point. And that even though there's going to be these expungements, and I think for the most part, criminal lawyers, everyone's going to say this is off your record, you don't have to talk about it anymore, it's done. For immigration purposes, people have to continue to list those on the immigration forms, and for immigration purposes as convictions, and they have to continue to disclose them. Because if they don't disclose them, then what's going to happen is immigration is going to say you're lying on your application, and not only do you have a conviction, but now you're committing fraud for not disclosing your conviction. So we really need to get the word out about that, and we're working closely with the state now to make sure that people know and that there are resources available for our immigrant communities across the state. So we'll pass it over.
Okay, so my job now that I have left the illustrious General Assembly is to coordinate, illustrious. But the people I worked with were illustrious. They were amazing, the people I worked with. There's some crazy ones there, but, I'm going to let that lie. My job now is to coordinate 7 agencies, including the state police. This is one of the few policies we have that touches 7 different agencies. So our revolving loan program is Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Anything that regulates the plant touching thing is the Department of Ag. The dispensaries are regulated under IDFPR. The public health, the task forces, information is DHS and public health. And then our favorite state agency as it relates to this topic is the state police. So it's a big, hairy, complicated thing. I have a friend that I want to come up here for a second. Because when you talk, this is a know your rights thing, and whenever I hear stories like this, it colors why we do what we do and why this is so big. So I just want you to take 2 minutes, because we don't have that much time.
Willie.
Not even that long.
My name is Willie J.R. Fleming, 2-time Human Rights Award winning, been an activist for about 20 years. But for the last 28 years, I was plagued with my past. Couldn't get my records expunged and sealed, and although I fought for people, it felt like nobody was fighting for me. On January 30th of this year, a couple days ago, because of the work of these women and others, Richard and their organizations, they gave me a second chance by expunging 16 charges and sealing 1 conviction. So I want to thank y'all. I want to thank y'all on behalf of my wife, who put in a lot of the work right here, Kei Fujioshi, and on behalf of my children for giving their father a second chance. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So I need you guys to know that this was the end of prohibition, but it's just the beginning of what legalization will look like. We have a lot of work to do, and it doesn't happen unless we have people on the ground, people in the community, everybody holding this thing accountable, because at the end of the day, this industry has looked the way it's looked for reasons. The criminal justice system is set up for reasons, and systems produce what systems are designed to produce. The only way to change what it produces is to change the system. So one of the questions we had on here was, what are the key things we're watching to know if legalization is a success? And this is something that I would like to I'd like to challenge everybody to think about, because we've all had this conversation about what does success look like when these first equity licenses come out. Because again, it's like we had to have a pre-enactment strategy and a post-enactment strategy. It's about whether whatever it is we did could stand up in court, because we know that people who don't get licenses, the first thing they're gonna do is sue to shut the whole thing down. So we had to really be thoughtful about what constitutionally sound language we could put in there to make sure that we could have the impact that we wanted. But I think all the time, like for me, the national ownership record is 4% nationally of communities of color participating in this industry. We're gonna have 75 licenses be let. If we had 22 licenses out of the 75, that would be 30%, but we don't know. We have to wait to see what is gonna happen. What's going to happen after those licenses are let is that we embedded into the law a disparity study and a demand study, which means not another single license will come out unless we prove what we did actually worked. That is what is significant and different from all the other states. The other states did it like this. You have a ballot initiative. Should it be licensed and regulated like alcohol? And everybody said yes, and then the state gave licenses. When the state gives licenses, you don't have $400,000, you don't have land, you don't have, it's like Hamilton, I don't have land, I don't have titles, I don't have any of this. But if you don't have that, you can't participate. You cannot unring that bell. You can't take licenses away from people who legitimately earn them. You can't unring that bell. So we did a combination of a flip the switch model and a limited license number. So the reason we're only doing 75 right now is because that'll be one dispensary for every 424,000 people. Oregon has one dispensary for every 6,000 people. So let me be clear. Nobody's monopolizing anything yet, because we're saving market space for equity applicants to come in so that when you land this thing, you have a place to compete. That is very, very, I think it's almost one of the most important things in terms of licensure that we did in the legislation, and why we have to study it. And why from January 1 until January 1 of next year, before there will not be another round after these craft grows and things come out. There will not be another round in another year until we say that the equity provisions that we did netted what we expected them to net. So you don't start to get to saturation until you start to hover around one dispensary for every 10,000 or so people. Let me repeat, one for every 424,000 people. That was on purpose. The lines are on purpose. The limited amount of licenses are on purpose, because we need space for people to compete once they come in. California legalized in 2016. They haven't let a license out yet. Massachusetts legalized. They haven't let an equity license out yet. So that means that the current operators are operating unopposed, no competition. And what everyone was afraid of here can't happen here, because we're not letting another license out until we prove it. So this is a long game. This is a long game. This isn't January 1, we're Colorado. This is a long game. You got to be in it for the long game. Or as our farming friends would like to say, you don't reap right after you sow. Yeah. This is the planting season. So we all got to be in on the thing. Now, questions from the audience? Yes.
I thank you for everything. I'm a little blown away. I hope I can articulate myself. I'm still blown away. Policy and practice are very different things.
Yes.
How and what can we do knowing that police are going after underground sellers? Thank you. Do I need to start over?
She said policy and practice are two very different things, and what can we do knowing that police are going after underground sellers?
And how that, in a way, that flies in the face of the over 700,000 expungements, and how do we
Work to do that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So part of the issue that we're going to be facing, and that advocates and many of you who are on the ground facing this are going to have to really pay close attention to, is that this one piece of legislation will not remove the structural and systemic racism that's embedded in the criminal justice system. We can't do all that in one bill. What we can try to do is create the conditions to compete. And what we can do now is that if you understand what your rights are, which is again what advocacy organizations on the ground are intent on teaching folks and getting the word out about, so that you know if you're being targeted, 2, if you're being searched and they don't have a right to search you, 3, if you are. We added cannabis to the Lawful Products Act. That's an important thing. It's in the Lawful Products Act like alcohol is in the Lawful Products Act. So we recognize it in this really weird gray area where it's still illegal at the federal level. We have states that are coming online to get it legally. There are very little things we can change federally. But it's going to be harder, and case law, I think, is going to show that's going to be harder to get folks for the same things. We are lucky, too, in Chicago, to have a mayor who is being very active and proactive about her relationship with the CPD and how they adjudicate things like this in the community. That's a very different, we're in a very different place right now. Because I'm telling you, if you go to any of the other states, the story that Ms. James told earlier about how that wasn't her experience with cannabis, people come to this like, of course people are smoking weed. Just go get the money. Like, just tax it and go get the money. Because they don't have a criminal justice. They weren't touched by that. Our communities come to this from a well-earned place of trauma. Because when you talk about black and brown people in cannabis, you talk about crime, you talk about arrests, you talk about laziness, you talk about, just like, it's a very different conversation than every movie, every television show, every joke in a commercial, every, high-end, credentialed, I have a degree and a wonderful dinner party with my wine and we had cannabis and thing, and we could just not think about where that came from. Because it's two totally different worlds. Statistics show that youth usage goes down or stays the same. The uptick is all y'all in this room. It's everybody between like 30 to 55 that now have an opportunity to get it legally and tested and packaged and labeled so you know exactly what it is you're gonna get. So those criminal justice concerns and those criminal justice concerns that are embedded in criminal justice reform will continue. They will absolutely continue, and we cannot let our eye off the ball. So while we can't fix the systemic and structural issues of racism within the criminal justice system, we can take a hell of a bite out of it, because one of the things, when they would say that cannabis is a gateway drug, I would contend that that's alcohol and cigarettes. It is a gateway conviction. It's a gateway conviction. Yes.
Can you wait for the mic?
Hi.
I wanted to, I'm not sure whether your position
that you have now is the same position as the cannabis oversight regulation officer?
No, it's different.
It's a different
Yeah, the
position.
cannabis regulatory control officer will be a person embedded just within IDFPR to make sure that the policies and procedures that go into place are harmonized with the other agencies. So, because it's almost like playing Jenga. If you move one thing, you can topple the other things. My job is to be at the 50,000-foot level to make sure everybody is talking to each other. Like, it used to be, like, DHS didn't necessarily talk to public health. Revenue didn't have very many reasons to talk to ag. Ag didn't have very many reasons to talk to IDFPR. And I couldn't be in IDFPR and take care of 7 agencies on top of it. So I had to be, that's the difference. So does that make sense?
Yes.
So
and
that will actually be a regulatory position as opposed to mine as a policy position.
just a short question. Someone mentioned that the R3 program was changed to another name. Could
Mm-hmm. It's
you
not.
speak on
No, it's
that?
not.
It's not.
Still
It's
the same?
R3.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
Yeah, recovery, reinvest, and renew. Sometimes we refer to it as our community reinvestment plan, but it's R3.
I'd like to add something just to Jill, to your question. Also, like, folks in the room, plug into an organization. Like I think it's important for us to show up in these spaces for our own individual interests, but you didn't get here and the application didn't get open because you wanted it to get open. It took massive amounts of people that were part of organizations to push this thing forward. And thinking about post the disparity study, you need to find a home, an organizational home that speaks to your values and be part of this movement. Because this is not just individuals, this is a movement of people. And I would urge all of you to find an organization, plug in, and play a part in shaping this vision moving forward, because it's extremely important. Just want to say that.
No, it's perfect. Yes.
For the applications that were submitted at the beginning of the year, how will you make the selection?
There's a grading process that happens within IDFPR. There will more than likely be a third-party grader just to make sure that there's no funny business. But it's a 250-point application, and they'll all be graded. We ended up receiving 700 individual applications, which represents about 4,000 or so licenses sought, and we're only letting 75 out. So we're bracing ourselves for what to do in tie situations, because really the only happy people will be the 75 people who got licenses out of the 40,000 licenses sought. So it's going to be a complicated process, but it is protected and confidential. And it's in IDFPR, which handles all of our other licenses as well. I don't know how we're going to make the announcement yet. But we're working towards making sure that we announce as much information as possible, because there's so much light on this. Like, people are going to want to know who and why. And then we're going to have to be able to answer who and why. And also, that'll be the building blocks for what the disparity study is going to be. Because in the when the medical program first started, there were points given for minority participation, but they were so negligible that you could almost leave them to the side. The points on this application are so integral to the application that there's no way you could deal with an application without an equity focus. So of the 700 individual applications we got, 600 of them identified as equity applicants. So this is going to be the most diverse pool we've seen across the country.
Hi, I
Hi.
don't know if this is the
Oh,
correct
hi.
panel. Hi. You know, we constantly hear, you touched a little bit on the zoning, and in the media, you constantly hear about the taxation. Why are the taxes so high?
Yeah. Part of it is that every state that is legal is surrounded by 3 to 4 states that are not. So we're not going to be able to really go into some of the illicit market and moving whole people into these things without a system that pays for that. So what I tell people is, you're paying to be in a licensed, regulated, safe environment where every single thing that you're consuming is being tested from seed to sale. You know exactly what it is you're getting. I know if a seed goes in the ground, I know where it went in the ground, and I know what product it ended up after it ends up on a shelf someplace. So the regulatory system in and of itself has to be paid for. When I talk to people about public safety in terms of how do you keep this away from kids? One, you got to acknowledge that it's around kids right now. How you keep this away from schools? Acknowledge that it's in schools right now. How are you going to keep it out of parks? Acknowledge that it's in parks right now. It's much easier to get weed than it is to get alcohol and cigarettes under the old system. So all of the functions that go into that. In addition to that, the money from the point of sale that's not going to the general revenue fund is going to a separate fund. And when I say general revenue fund, I mean the fund that the state uses to fund nonprofit organizations across the state to do our social service safety network, which has been run into the ground. It's been hollowed out and run into the ground. They are the first organizations to get cut when there's budget cuts. They are the first organizations to die on the vine when your highly resourced organizations who can withstand budgetary things like that can stay afloat. This was specifically designed to have 25% of those dollars go into a fund directly to those communities that were impacted the most. So not only is it participation in the industry, it's also what we do with the money from the industry, and then what we do with and that's the taxes that you pay on top of it. Now, having said that, many states have had to figure out what the proper taxation rate is. And as we grow and as the program grows, hopefully we laid markers that we get someplace, and the idea is that eventually maybe those things will come down. But in any of the legal states, they're about midline, and that grew out of our want to not tax so high that you wouldn't go. Because there are some people who still won't go. There's some people who won't transition into the legal market. But $20 million in 12 days shows what the demand is for a licensed, legally regulated, tested environment with products that are marketed and labeled, knowing exactly what you get. That there is strong demand in this state, and that it just shows an ability to grow.
Quick question over here. Hey, I first and foremost want to thank you and everyone else that's actually out here making this happen for us. So thank you. Kudos to you and all the rest of the staff.
Thank you.
My question is, I know, unfortunately, like you said, it's only 75, so it's closed at this point. But my question is in regards to the cultivating part of it. How do we go about getting licenses for that, or what is the process?
That application process is open right now.
Okay.
So that you go to, that's from the Department of Ag, and we can talk offline about that, but it is, those applications are open. You can download the application from the Department of Ag website. And that is for craft grow, infusions, processors, and transporters. And there's no limit on transporters. And so that's the other thing, is like, people need to understand, they're gonna need lawyers and accountants and real estate professionals and people who know HVAC systems and people who can design dispensaries and people who, I mean, like, there's a lot in this industry's gonna need everything that every industry needs. So there is a lot, and I wanna really make sure that, communities of color understand that when the question comes, like, did we miss the boat? Are we too late? Did we miss the boat? We will miss the boat if we don't understand that it's bigger than cultivators and dispensaries. This is a whole entire new industry. And let's get some over here.
We have a question back here.
In the back? Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Congratulations for all the effort that you've done for all of it.
All of us.
My name is Eric White. I'm a cannabis rights attorney. My mission is to help individuals and businesses solve their cannabis rights problems. Ultimately, what you said about cannabis being a gateway
Conviction.
that's absolutely correct. My question is, and you may be aware of this, in some areas throughout the state of some areas throughout Illinois, throughout the country, local law enforcement agencies have decided against funding to test cannabis after someone's arrested. I believe it was just recently announced this week that the good folks in Austin, Texas, I believe, are doing that.
When you say funding, they've declined to fund the funds to test people?
To test for if you're arrested for
Yeah.
possession of cannabis, then it subsequently has to be tested.
You have to prove it, yeah.
That it's there. So with the disparity and the discrepancies with hemp,
Oh, yeah.
hemp or THC, some departments have decided that we just won't even waste money testing it. Therefore, that helps provide more incentive to make sure that conviction doesn't take place. My question for you is, are you aware of any law enforcement agencies in this state that are trying to move in that direction?
Oh, no. No.
Go with the testing?
No,
Yeah.
I'm not aware of, no.
If the funding is not there to test, then we can avoid the conviction.
No, I'm not aware of law enforcement agencies that are taking that kind of a progressive or proactive approach on this. This is a ongoing conversation with law enforcement at the state level, the Association of the Chiefs of Police, all those folks. There are a lot of people. Illinois has 102 counties. And for those of us that live in the greater Chicago metropolitan area, and who have the kind of state's attorney we have, that's not what you have in Peoria. That's not what you have in East St. Louis. That's not what you have in Rockford. That's not what you have in Waukegan. So because it's like, and so we literally, that's why we did the combination of sealments and expungements with executive action, the governor's action. So, and I want to make clear, most governors pardon on the way out when it's safe. This governor pardoned the first 11,017 cases in his first year. Like after this bill, that is a totally different thing. So no, we are hoping that as the stigma comes down and people realize what usage rates really are, and it sticks these equity conversations about fairness, the things that, and one of them is this, that usage rates are the same across demographics, but they're not adjudicated the same across demographics. So we are constantly and being vigilant about working with law enforcement across the country to get that message across. We ain't there yet. Okay. Yes.
Hello, Toy.
Hi.
Hi. It's an honor to speak with you, but there's conflicting information when you look at the adult use cannabis summary. And there's two of them. One of them is based off of Senate Bill 7, and the other one is based off of House Bill 1438.
Yeah.
And Richard, in your second slide that said what happened, it said that Senate Bill 7 had passed, but I thought it died in committee.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a quirk of the legislature. So the bill that eventually passed was 1438.
1430, okay.
It started as Senate Bill 7 because when it was announced, when it was first drafted and made public, it was like the seventh bill that they had filed in the year that it started. But this was an effort that took almost 3 years to get done. Started with decriminalization in 2016. I was a sponsor of legalizing industrial hemp in 2017, and then we all came together to do this bill thing, and it went through iterations through the process. And so that's just, once you could sit with us and we'll show you how to track legislation.
Okay.
But the bill that first got introduced was Senate Bill 7. The bill that actually got passed
Was the 1438, right. And it was between, big difference was in Article 10,
Yeah,
And where
well, it's because there was
people-
hundreds of stakeholders.
Yeah, because Article 10 would allow everybody to grow their own.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but they
And
killed
we
it, so
couldn't,
now
well, we
it's,
couldn't get that past law enforcement.
okay.
So it was, and you should have heard it. People were thinking, like, that people who were growing it at home were gonna be able to compete with, like, the cartel. And I'm like, you must not know how hard it is to grow a marijuana plant. Like, anybody who's ever had a high school buddy that had something in their closet growing and knows that they didn't get it done right, it's not an easy thing to do. So that's how the compromise settled on 5 plants for medicinal patients. And that we're trying to work on now because the law says that you may sell seeds. Because this is so highly competitive and highly regulated, you have a reticence on behalf of the industry to want to sell the seeds. So we're gonna have to step in.
Yeah, I was really hoping Senate Bill 7 would have passed, because then I would have been, I'm looking to.
I know, that's what we wanted too.
Yeah.
That's why we filed it like that.
I'm looking to stay just small scale. I don't want to pay $5,000 for an application license and another $5,000 to be a transporter when I'm not going to be driving truckloads of marijuana or weed or anything. I just want to stay just small scale. Is there anything in the works to reduce some of those licensing costs?
Well, right now, for social equity applicants, licensing costs are half whatever the normal cost is.
I should have got.
There's
busted
also a
once.
revolving loan program to help, and it gets up to $250,000 to help you get your business up off the ground. And then you can decide what kind of business you want to start. So if you want to have an like we wanted to, Selena used to talk about, what if I just want my tamales? Like you have somebody that makes really good brownies. Just, that's all they do. They're not trying to have a dispensary. They're not trying to have that infusion license is designed for someone who does want to be in the industry, but kind of small scale. You could grow that as big as you want to, but it's designed for as those other entry ramps come on, the cost and the amount to do it go down. So again, it was our attempt to add more on ramps, because across the country it was really only cultivations or dispensaries, and you were looking at 6 to 12 million for a dispensary and 12 to 15 million for a cultivation. And to Richard's points are like, who has that? I didn't know. I've been to a golf course, but I can call 5 people like, y'all got $1 million? Can we go in together? It's hard.
Yeah, that's the area I wanted to get into. I registered Cannabis Kitchens LLC with the state
Well, there
of
you
Illinois.
go. Somebody
Got my-
thinking ahead.
Yeah, I've got my federal ID. I've got hemp processing license already, and I got my first pound last night.
Well,
So-
all right.
But
Okay, thank you.
staying small scale, I'd like to also do infusion for.
Okay, so
Full.
I would have to point you in the right direction,
Sure.
because I personally can't help you do
Okay.
anything, but because it's policy. But
you for your
but
time.
I love the story, and I will help point you in the right direction if we can talk offline.
Thank you.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left. One more question with a microphone right here.
Okay, there's 2 questions.
Hi.
And I have a question for Mr. Wallace. In your presentation, you indicated the difference between craft growers and cultivation centers. What is the square footage? Can you repeat what they were?
I can pull it up on the slide because I don't want to give you a misnomer.
While he's pulling it up on the side, it's 14,000. It's 14,000 square feet.
Look at you. Love that.
It's 14,000 square feet. And that is in competition, but that would also be in competition with the max, which was designed under the medical program, which is 210,000 square feet. So it is designed specifically for people to be able to create niche businesses. So the model is craft breweries. Like you had Budweiser and you had, I don't know, beer. What's another beer brand?
312.
312. Okay, so you have these big things, and then you have, restaurants and stuff that brew their own, and they have their own small label, and they create, so it was designed after that model. It was designed to give people an opportunity to have something smaller.
And the second question, I keep hearing about this low-interest loan program for social equity
Yes.
applicants, but I couldn't find any information on that.
DCEO, Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. That is a $30 million revolving loan. You can start applying for it now. You could receive a conditional approval, and then the formal approval will come after you actually are awarded a license of some type. It's designed for social equity applicants, and it's also, and it was totally funded by the license fees that the medical operators had to pay for the privilege of being first. So literally, it was like, can't take your license from you, but I can do this. It's like, we can't do this. So that's really what funded the revolving loan thing. And I'm praying that that's gonna continue to grow, and it funds itself. It should recycle through communities. Okay, this is the last question, guys. Okay, sorry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I would like to inquire about the conceal and carry, because they were saying that you cannot be in a dispensary and have it unless you're under medical. And then they said if you do it individually, you still can go to jail. Is that accurate?
Are you saying if you have a concealed carry license, where you're allowed to carry a weapon?
Basically, they were saying like if you decide to apply, that you cannot have that any longer. But if you apply for it and you go for medical, you can't have it that way either. But if you go into dispensaries individually, you still can keep it?
Okay, so most businesses will have, under the concealed carry law, businesses in the state of Illinois, let me put my legislator hat back on. Under the concealed carry law, businesses have the right to post outside of their businesses whether or not they allow firearms in their establishment. Most dispensaries, I would say rightfully so, you'll see the little thing that says, no, you can't carry a weapon in here. That has nothing to do with the cannabis law. That's actually underneath the concealed carry law. Your ability to get a FOID card, if you use adult use recreation, you can still get a FOID card if you recreationally use cannabis. It's not considered an addictive. We're not saying you're automatically an addict, and it's in the Lawful Products Act. It's in the Lawful Products Act. Much like if you drink alcohol, you can still get a FOID card. The medical card is a little bit different because there are federal provisions that talk about if you are using a substance that falls under that Schedule I. So you don't have an automatic revocation of a FOID card for this adult use thing. There are specific things that you probably need to know more about in terms of getting a FOID card if you hold a medical card for medicinal use. But whether or not you can carry a weapon into an establishment is based on those establishments, and I would pretty much guarantee that will not be allowed in any of the dispensaries. Yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It was a wonderful conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day.